for another.
Bards are fun, but they do come with a lot of baggage. From the all too popular image of bards as some sort of sexed up proto-rock stars to the gravitational pull of the tortured artist motif, the cliches surrounding the class can make role-playing bards difficult, uncomfortable, and unrelatable, especially for newer players. But bards are objectively great. They're highly versatile, they have access to some awesome spells, and they can play a fun and vital support role in any party. They offer players a wealth of opportunity for some amazing social game. And no one actually needs you to perform at the table. Seriously, no one. But we'll get into that later in the video. If you're looking for some tips on how to make a more relatable, fully realized, and fun bard character, this video is for you. Today we're talking D&D bards and using real-world, up-to-date history from the Viking Age to give you some bardic inspiration. By exploring the history of Viking Age poets, or Skalds as they're called in Old Norse, we'll provide you with tips and tricks for conceptualizing and creating 3 different versions of a Viking-inspired bard. One that cuts quite close to Viking Age history, one that blends history and fantasy, and one that fully embraces the fantastical elements of the game, but retains some nuanced Viking flavor. And stick around until the end of the video for a free, high-quality academic resource that you can use right at the game's table to make role-playing your Viking-inspired bards easier, more engaging, and more fun. But in the spirit of fun, we'll start with a story to help explain what Skaldic poetry is and how it works. So if our sources are to be believed, Skalds thought that poetry was a gift from the god Odin. But that's actually jumping ahead a bit. It all starts with a war. At the beginning of time, 2 factions of gods, the Aesir and the Vanir, fought a terrible war. Being evenly matched and with destruction mounting, the 2 sides came to the negotiating table to talk peace. Terms were set, and to seal the deal, the gods spat into a vessel. As you do. But that's not the end of it. Taking that intermingled spit, they create a man called Kvasir, and being the manifestation of truce and the physical product of all the gods, Kvasir was so wise that he could answer any question. He goes around the world teaching and spreading knowledge until he meets 2 dwarves, Fjalar and Galar, who invite him to their house for a private chat. But these 2 dwarves are a bit twisted. They murder Kvasir and they drain his blood into some containers, mixing it with honey to create a mead. But the mead that they create is a product of Kvasir's very essence, and whoever drinks it becomes some sort of poet-scholar. Sounding very bardish, but the story isn't done yet. The dwarves manage to avoid prosecution for the death of Kvasir by claiming that he suffocated on his own intelligence because no one could actually ask him any questions that posed him any sort of challenge. But while the dwarves manage to get out of trouble this time, it's not long before it finds them again. They're visited by a giant named Gilling and his wife. Gilling and the dwarves go out to sea one day, but their boat capsizes and Gilling drowns. When they tell the giant's wife what happened, she's understandably distraught, but the dwarves tire of her crying very quickly and decide to drop a millstone on her head, killing her. Now when he learns what happened, Gilling's son Suttungr comes to seek vengeance, and in exchange for their lives, the dwarves give Suttungr this mead. Suttungr has no interest in sharing his prize, and he hides it inside a mountain fastness guarded by his daughter, Gunnlöð. But news of the mead's existence has reached the ears of Odin, and he goes out looking for it. He disguises himself, he creates a gap in the workforce of Suttungr's brother, Boigi, and he does the work of 9 people over the course of a summer in exchange for 1 drink of the mead. Boigi, you see, is disgruntled by Suttungr's hoarding of the mead, and he agrees to help Odin win his payment. The 2 bore a hole into the mountain. Odin changes into the shape of a snake, and he makes his way inside. He deceives Gunnlöð into giving him 3 drinks of the mead, and he swallows it all before taking off in the shape of an eagle. But Suttungr sees Odin making his escape, and he gives chase, turning himself into an eagle as well. The chase is intense, and Odin is worried about being caught, so he does what he can to help kind of buy himself a little extra speed. Yeah, he poops out some of the mead. This, let's call it somewhat diminished variation of the mead of poetry, explains bad poetry's existence and just general creativity amongst people. Clearly feeling a bit lighter, he manages to fly over Asgardr now and spit the rest of the mead into some pots that the other gods have waiting for him. And unlike Suttungr, Odin shares this mead out amongst the gods and the goddesses and the skilled poets of the world. Now this is more than just a fun story. Within this narrative are a number of important pieces of information that Viking Age poets used to actually compose their works. You see, Skaldic poetry has a lot of very restrictive rules, so poets actually need to reach for a very wide variety of terms and phrases to stand in for more ordinary words. To quote Snorri Sturluson, an Icelandic author who compiled a textbook of sorts for composing Skaldic poetry, young poets should, quote, desire to learn the language of poetry and furnish themselves with a wide vocabulary using traditional terms, or else desire to understand what is expressed obscurely. So poets wouldn't necessarily call themselves poets in their compositions, but they might refer to themselves as the bearer of Odin's gift, or the drinker of Suttungur's mead, or instead of asking for a hearing for their poem, they may call on someone to listen to Kvasir's blood. These are all called Kennings, a form of poetic circumlocution where once you know the story being referred to, you're kind of in on the joke and can decode the meaning of the poetry. But because of the complex rules of Skaldic poetry, a stanza can just be packed with a whole bunch of these. To compare it with modern media, this would be like if a scene in a movie was just Easter eggs heaped on top of each other to the point where anyone not familiar with the reference would just be kind of confused about what's going on. Take this stanza, for example. Here we have a poet calling and saying, Valgeuter, we have to repay you for the powerful drinks of the hall of the Falur, of the path of the snowdrift, outstanding owner of wave horses. Very complex, very convoluted, very difficult to understand what's going on. So, Valgeuter is one of the over 100 names for Odin. Falur is the name of a dwarf. The path of a snowdrift is a mountain. The dwarf of the mountain, then, is a giant. The hall of a giant is a cave. So the poet is saying that he must repay Odin for the powerful drinks from a giant's cave. So we know that the giant being referred to, then, is Suttungur, and the drink, therefore, must be the mead of poetry. As you can see, this leaves the language of Skaldic poetry extremely complex, comprised of sometimes totally opaque references and making use of actually very antiquated vocabulary. And it was that way even in the Viking Age itself. But the artistry needed to compose this stuff is really impressive, and there was a huge market for it in the Viking Age. And this is why skalds make an awesome inspiration for bards in D&D. One of the key things you always need to consider when rolling a new character is giving them justifications or motivations to be pulled into an adventure in the first place. Skalds come with these pre-baked. One of the primary applications for Skaldic poetry in the Viking Age was in praise of kings and chieftains. Particularly skilled skalds lived lavish lives, producing and performing poetry in exchange for wealth and comfort. A skald would learn the basics of their art, hone it a little bit, and then head out to try to gain favor in the court of a ruler or a magnate by composing poetry praising their exploits. This can give you some great options, especially at the beginning of a campaign. Maybe you've just set out from home with the bones of a praise poem in mind, and you're looking for the perfect subject to complete it. Or maybe you've already won your way into employment as a minor court poet, but you've got your eye on rising to the top, so you keep grinding it out while surrounded by the intrigues of court life. There's loads of options here, and these can give you even a starting point for your relationships with the PCs in your party. Check out the resource at the end of this video for some inspiration on this, and work with your GM to come up with a backstory that really fits in their world. But you are going to need more than a backstory. You're going to need a detailed character concept with flavor and nuance and goals to work towards. Don't worry, Skalds have you covered there too. Remember that according to the sources, Skaldic poetry is a composite product of peace, personified wisdom, violence, compensation, deception, shape-shifting, and gift-giving. These diverse, many elements reflect its many uses, and no matter what kind of bard you want to play, there's a Skaldic inspiration out there for you. So let's turn to some character concepts now, starting with a more historical build. So if I were rolling a bard and looking to keep it pretty closely tied to Viking Age history, I'd look to some of the medieval Icelandic sagas for inspiration. There's a whole set of these that retell the lives of Viking Age poets, including sagas like Cormac Saga, Gunnlaug Saga, and Eyja's Saga, which I talked about before in our video on Viking-inspired barbarian characters. I had a similar note there, but it bears repeating here. Remember that the point of all of this is inspiration and fun, and that there are a whole host of things in medieval sources that really should not be played out at the games table. So dip into these sources, use them for inspiration, have fun, but leave the dicey stuff there where it belongs. There's links to these sagas in the description, but I think two of the more compelling characters to use for developing a Skald-inspired bard are Egill Skallagrimsson and Hallfreðr Vandræðaskald Óttarsson, whose nickname Vandræðaskald means something like troublesome poet. Now, I choose these two for the simple fact that they invite us to expand our thinking about what bards are and what they can be. These two are constantly showcasing the full range of situations that the bard class puts at your disposal. Their charisma, intelligence, and poetic ability are constantly getting them into and then out of trouble. They have complicated, multi-dimensional relationships with those around them. Their motivations and desires are deep and well realized. And Egill in particular is a great reminder that just because you're charismatic doesn't actually mean you're automatically some sort of hot extrovert. You don't even have to be terribly well liked. You just have charm that you turn on when it's important. Using these two as an inspiration, I think that rolling a bard with a strong historical flavor would naturally lead me to the College of Eloquence from Tasha's Cauldron of Everything. Poets like Egill and Hallfreðr are so skilled in their poetry that they can compose skaldic stanzas with double meanings or hidden messages in them. They can build up the kings and those they serve, as well as those around them, with their words, and they can literally save their own lives with their skill as orators. They can even level curses at those who cross them. For this build, think about where your skill with poetry comes from. Is it the product of careful study and exchange with other traveling poets? Are you the child of a well-known poet trying to make a living in the family business while attempting to step out of your parents' shadow? Or were you simply born with a virtuosic talent for poetry? You should also think about where you're from and where you're going. Egill and Hallfreðr are born in Iceland, but they only start building their careers as poets once they go abroad. Have you had some success in cultivating your reputation as a poet, or are you still waiting for your next big break? These two also open up an opportunity for some flavorful homebrewing here. Neither skald is associated with musical instruments, which of course are the traditional spellcasting focuses for bards, but they do regularly compose poetry about a whole range of items, especially the gifts that they receive from their patrons. For your Skald-inspired bard, try to think about an item that is of special importance to them and their story, and make this the focus of your bard's spellcasting. This could be an arm ring, a cloak, a weapon, something that you've been gifted by your patron, or could be a family heirloom of some sort, a token of promised love, a memento from a fallen friend, or a reminder of an enemy that you mean to go back and confront one day. The important thing is that this focus is tied to relationships. This is the core of the College of Eloquence, after all. It is all about the complex ways that words and actions connect people. There are a ton of hooks here that your GMs can use to build out compelling stories, and these can provide some great foundations for character arcs and development, which is just going to make playing your bard that much more fun. But there's actually no need to stay closely wedded to Viking Age history here. History should serve as a springboard for your creativity, not a rigid constraint. Don't be afraid to take inspiration from these sources from the past, but go in any direction you want. For example, Skalds can provide a great inspiration for characters that blend history and fantasy. And for something more along these lines, I'd suggest a College of Lore bard. Here we can get creative and cobble together some bits of historical information in order to create an immensely flavorful bard build. The inspiration here is actually the god Odin himself. According to Eddic poetry, this is another style of Viking Age poetry that's much freer than those Skaldic meters. According to Eddic poetry, Odin is deeply interested in cosmic and numinous knowledge, especially about Ragnarok, the sort of end or rebirth of the universe in Norse mythology. He goes out and he collects information about the cosmos through travel, experience, and knowledge contests with giants and other sorts of beings. Some scholars have suggested that the Eddic poems, which record these exploits and other mythological matters, were also passed from poet to poet as part of real-life Viking Age rites of passage, though others do view this as a bit speculative. But no one's going to test you here, and it's in this historical gray area that we can really play around with things in TTRPGs, so dive in. Build a College of Lore bard who is out to learn the arcane secrets of the universe. They're driven to know things, and each adventure on the way is an opportunity to test their knowledge and accrue more, consolidating it into their poetic repertoire. Have a think about what set them on this course. Have they stumbled into events much bigger than themselves? Are they arrogant and ambitious, leading them to choose this path? Or are they some sort of initiated knowledge keeper for a community of some sort, and this is their burden and responsibility to bear? For Odin, it seems to be the case that he learns that he's doomed to die in Ragnarok, and there's some suggestion that he's either seeking a way to kind of save his own neck or to stack the cosmic deck so that at least some of the Aesir survive. But what is your bard's inspiration for seeking out this knowledge? And while you're there thinking about that, see if there's some way to add some flavor to your bard's spellcasting focus here as well. Maybe they carry a token from a wisdom contest or an item of special importance for their quest for knowledge that poetically inspires them. One of the famous early poets of the Viking Age, Bragi and Gamli, or Bragi the Old, he composes a famous poem based on the mythological scenes depicted on a shield that he receives as a gift, so you can still use the history of Skalds to really jazz up your College of Lore bards here. Similarly, while the player's handbook suggests that the College of Lore bards should be meeting in libraries and actual colleges, I think it's totally okay to flavor a Viking-inspired College of Lore bard to be much more focused on learning from discussion, especially with powerful entities. If your bard is trying to pull back the curtain on the universe, let's face it, that's not the kind of information that people just write in a book and stick on a library shelf somewhere. Similarly, no one is just going to volunteer that information to just anyone. Viking Age history allows us to think deeper about what a high-level College of Lore bard might look like, and it gives us some important flavor elements for how they accrue their knowledge, how they share it over time, and I really don't think someone like Odin is going to be spreading what he knows in a lecture hall somewhere. But what if you really want to lean into the fantastical? This is where Odin actually has a few more tricks up his sleeve. See, Norse deities aren't associated with just one thing or one domain. They are complex and multifaceted, and Odin is more so than most. He is indeed associated with poetry and magic, but he is also associated with a host of other things, including death. At one point, he supposedly sacrifices himself to himself, cheating death to gain further cosmic knowledge and magical control over runes. After this, he gains a host of new powers, including being able to wake the dead. He sits under the corpses of the hanged or visits various burial mounds to speak with the deceased and gain further knowledge from beyond the veil. This sort of necromantic aspect of Odin really lets players gravitate towards what is, in my opinion, one of the most flavorful but least played bardic archetypes, the College of Spirits from Van Richten's Guide to Ravenloft. Now, the community is a little split on this archetype, but if you've been curious to try it out, an Odin-inspired spirit bard is a great way to set yourself up for a super flavorful, atypical bard experience with some great fun and great storytelling. Now, the tendency that I've seen with spirit bards is to play them like 19th century occultists or spiritualists or Edgar Allan Poe style tortured artists, and that's totally fine. But I think we can lean on some Viking Age history here to do even better, especially in a high fantasy setting. So, to start, I want to return to a point I made in our video about Viking-inspired barbarians, which is that there is this really interesting, developing picture of Viking Age Scandinavians being involved in some sort of ancestor worship. There's growing evidence that people were engaging with the dead in some very complex ways. Human bones were incorporated into the fabric of some houses. People were visiting grave mounds or holding feasts, apparently to interact with the spirits of the dead. And graves were regularly reopened, and items were removed or added for a whole variety of reasons. Now, I've included a link in the description to an interview with archaeologist Alison Klevnes, who discusses some of these materials and these matters in her work. In particular, there's some suggestion from our sources that people entered grave mounds to retrieve powerful items that had been altered or changed somehow by being included in a burial assemblage. Now, I think this is a great additional option for the expanded list of spellcasting focuses for spirit bards. Beads, brooches, bones, weapons, tools, keys, your options are really wide here because Viking Age funerary practices included furnishing the grave with a wide variety of goods. There is also archaeological and textual evidence, including a story about a sorceress from the saga of Eric the Red, which suggests that distaffs, a tool for spinning, as well as a reliance on some sort of song or chant, were important in communicating with spirits as part of the especially feminine magical practice of Seidr. Have a think about what sort of focus you want your spirit bard to use, how they got it, what it symbolizes for them, and how it links to the spirits that they seek to commune with. If we consider Odin himself from the perspective of a spirit bard, it's possible that we can even play with a story about him embalming and reanimating the severed head of his friend and kinsman Mimir in order to consult it for cosmic wisdom. So I think you can really go nuts here. Norse mythology, Viking Age poetry, and archaeological evidence all give you some really fantastic inspiration for rolling up a spirit bard who is engaged in channeling the spirits into their poetic practice. The Eddic poem Havamal, or the Sayings of the High One, even includes a list of charms or spells that Odin purportedly knows, and some of these fold amazingly well into the spirit tale table included in the College of Spirits class description. There really shouldn't be any pressure on you to perform at the table, but you can use a poem like Havamal or stanzas from it to add some flavor here if you want to. Now this brings me to an awesome resource for role-playing a Viking-inspired bard. No matter if you're trying to keep things pretty close to history or are way out there drawing from the mythology or mixing and matching these concepts to craft your own interpretation, you're going to want to check out the Skaldic project database. This thing is a gold mine. It is completely free, open access, it's collaboratively curated by some of the leading scholars in the field, and it is packed full of information. You can search through hundreds of entries for individual kennings to flavor your bard's dialogue. You can find whole stanzas to recite if you want to lean into that performance side of things. And there's everything from insulting poems for when you want to throw down some vicious mockery, to rousing poems to flavor your bardic inspiration, even love poetry if you do find yourself wanting to play into that horny bard stereotype. There are also biographies for known skalds, which you can use as inspiration for developing your characters. I've got a link to the database in the description below, so go check it out. While you're down there, please do leave a like and a comment. And if you're ready to roll a Viking-inspired bard, take a look at this video so that you can use their name to inject even more fun, flavor, and storytelling opportunities into your character.